I'm Neha Kumar. I'm an assistant professor in international affairs and interactive computing. And we've been working with SLS as part of the SLS Smart Cities and Connected Communities Fellows Program for the semester. The team that worked together, actually, it would be great if you guys could stand up. So there's Amit Doshi, Juan Carlos Rodriguez, Emma, and Todd. And so our team was focusing on issues around participation, access, and social equity. And we framed it that way because we wanted it to be passé, which means in Spanish, what does it mean in Spanish? Coming, right? Or the word passé? P-A-S-E. I was saying how we...
It's go through, like go through.
To go through,
Yeah.
yes. So, some poetic license there. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. And the format of this event is going to be as follows. So first, I would like our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll start with short introductions. And then we'll go, so we put together a few questions that we also shared with them. But we'll see how it goes. So we'll start with the questions that we have, and then as the discussion kind of evolves, we'll just let it go wherever it does. And feel free to interject with questions. We were thinking that we would go with this set of questions for the first half, and then have you guys kind of pose questions to the panelists in the second half. The other thing I will mention is that we are video recording this event because SLS wanted it to be video recorded. But if any of you are uncomfortable or are asking a question that you don't want to show up in the video recording, please let Amit know, and then we'll get rid of that part of the recording. So just to make sure that everyone's comfortable sharing, because that's what we want first. You guys should feel comfortable sharing whatever you would like to, and ask whatever questions come to mind. So with that, let's start with Darlene Rodriguez. Would you like to introduce yourself? And actually, can you speak into that microphone when you do?
Oh, I thought we have multiple.
Sorry, we have two. And for now, we can share, and then later, when David's here, you might have to share.
So just introduce ourselves, and then people will then begin the process of sharing a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, you can do a short introduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought, let me make sure I know what I'm doing. Well, hello. Can everybody hear me okay? Or at least can the recorder hear me okay, which is an audience of one. That's pretty awesome. Hello and welcome to Georgia Tech. Since I'm the first person to be able to say that, and I'm new to Georgia Tech. My full name is Darlene Rodriguez-Schaefer. You can call me Darlene or Dr. Rodriguez, the kid down the street. That is totally cool with me. My sidekick for the evening is Javier-Schaefer Rodriguez, and he is probably why I do what I do, and ultimately why many of us do what we do, because we want to change things to make things better for those who come before us, and in gratitude for those who've left the world behind to make our place a little bit better. I'm here by guest and invitation. I'm at Kennesaw State University. I'm a faculty member in the Wellstar College of Health and Human Services, and my area of specialty is in social work and human services, primarily the nonprofit sector, and how nonprofits, in my estimation, actually are the broker for civil society. If you are a vulnerable community group or a vulnerable population, sadly, you may find government does not represent you, private industry does not reflect you, and or it's cost prohibitive. And at the same time, you may find that the nonprofit sector actually meets you in the middle. There is a representative voice of your individual interests and collective masses to be able to move policy forward and hopefully make things better for a collective all. So my area of interest is actually on immigrant integration and how the nonprofit sector facilitates that process. And I look at immigration broadly when it comes to issues of voluntary and involuntary migration across the United States history, not just the current contemporary issues of immigration. So those who came here as involuntary processes of migration that could include slavery and indentured servitude. According to current status, it would be child trafficking. Hola, mi cielo. Bello. child trafficking or sex trafficking, since that's also involuntary migration, but also voluntary migration that can include asylees, refugees, people who arrive with status such as visas, H-1B visas, labor visas, student visas, those who come here with entry without inspection, which is what you would call undocumented, legal permanent residents, and those who become U.S. citizens through the naturalization process. So what I bring to the table is more about immigration and how smart cities that have an empathetic bent who want to maximize receptivity can actually become a more thriving community as a result. So as the rest of the panelists share, we'll include a conversation. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Nassim JafariNaimi. I'm an assistant professor of digital media here in the School of Literature, Media, and Communication at Georgia Tech. Thank you so much for inviting me. My research is about, generally about basically feminist critiques of emerging technologies. In the past 10, 15 years, I've been looking at technologies as varied as augmented reality to social media, looking at how they incorporate values such as democracy and social justice, and how they evoke values and such as those to kind of create a space for being legitimate, but then what those values actually mean in the context of their creation and how they are enacted. The two projects that I've recently finished that deal specifically with smart cities, one has to do, one is a critique of algorithmic morality. Some of you may have heard of self-driving cars and how they are arguments for programming them to kill, because we know that self-driving cars will get into situations where accidents are inevitable. So engineers are arguing that they should be programmed to decide who to kill in such situations, and the categories and criteria that are being proposed for those decisions tend to be very reductive and problematic. So that is one project that I recently worked on. A related project perhaps is one that looks at what happens when we have screens and input mechanisms at every corner of every city, and you know, what would people be able to express if they are able to write on the city, and what does that process mean then for you know, interpreting the city, navigating the city, who is considered as being legitimate in the city, and structures of power that kind of supports. So those are two of the ongoing projects, and as we have these conversations, we'll talk more.
My name is Kishore Ramachandran. I'm a faculty in the College of Computing, School of Computer Science, and I'm pleasantly surprised I'm in the minority in this panel. It's very good. And and I'm also going to bring, I know what Mackenzie works on, and I heard the other two. And so I'm going to bring a different perspective to this panel, more from the technology side. I work in what is called distributed systems, and in particular, I work on sensor-based distributed systems. You know, you have cameras everywhere, you have other kinds of sensing modalities everywhere. And so one of the things that is really challenging to do is to draw not just the bits from the sensors, but how can you sort of get knowledge out of the things that you perceive in the environment. So converting, you know, sense data to knowledge. That, of course, is the role of domain experts who work in these specific domains, whether it is transportation or, you know, urban welfare and things like that. But the domain experts are trained in what they are trained in. So for instance, if you think about a computer vision researcher, he or she is good at writing detection algorithms and tracking algorithms and things like that, but ask them to write a 1,000 camera network program, they wouldn't know where to start. And so these days, with all these sensors all around us, it's actually a large-scale distributed systems problem that we have. And so my group is primarily focused on how can we sort of, we are plumbers, basically. We connect the bits, connect the pipes so that you can do the analysis that you want to do, whatever the analysis may be. And so that's the kind of thing that we do. There are two sides to what I do. One is focused on the high end, meaning, if you think about sensor streams like cameras, they need a lot of bandwidth. And also, when it comes to sensor-based distributed computing, all of us are familiar with cloud computing. Cloud computing is focused on throughput-oriented applications. I mean, we make airline reservations and things like that. It is good for those kinds of things. But for many of the applications that are sensor-driven, cloud is not good, mainly because latency is what you care about. And so given that, you want the processing to happen as close to the edge of the network as possible. And so that is the part that we are focusing on, is how can you sort of have geo-distributed infrastructures so that you can do processing close to the edge of the network. That's one side of it. The other side of it, which is very meaningful for the discussion of this panel, is that for anything and everything that we do, we think that we are doing something on a mobile device. Think again. It's happening in the cloud, right? Anything that you're seeing here is the result of what's happening in the cloud. Now, that's great if you live in well-served communities where you have access to the wide area infrastructure. What if you live in, urban areas where there is no connectivity? And if you think about it, businesses will put infrastructure where there is return on investment. If there is no return on investment, they're not going to put the infrastructure. But how can you enable those who are in underserved neighborhoods to get the same kinds of facilities that we all take for granted? That is another part of what I'm working on, and this particular thing is joined with WCA. Sherry's sitting here, Mackenzie is here. So we're looking at how we can empower people who are in underserved communities to enjoy the same benefits that we take for granted when we live in well-served communities. So I'll stop there, and then we can pick up the conversation again.
Hi, so I'm Mackenzie Madden. I'm the Associate Director of the Westside Communities Alliance. For those of you that don't know, we're based here at Georgia Tech. We're over in the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts. We've been in existence for 6 years, and I've been with the Alliance for 5. And when we say Westside, we're talking about English Avenue, Vine City, West End, Washington Park, and parts of Bankhead. So we're a communications network that's designed to bridge the gap between those communities, the institutes of higher education in the city, governmental agencies, nonprofits, so that we can all better resource a community that we know is underserved and historically has been underserved. Two of the things that we do a lot of programming on the West Side, but also just a lot of making connections. But two of the things that we do specifically related to this concept of smart cities, I would say, is our resource center as well as our data dashboard. So our resource center is located at the corner of Martin Luther King and Joseph Lowry. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the West Side. And it's a very highly trafficked area. It's right in front of a MARTA bus stop. And we see people all the time come in and use our free community computer lab. We also do public benefit screening there with the Atlanta Community Food Bank. And I think it was definitely a wake-up call for me when I was in that space pretty regularly, because it's easy for us, especially here at Tech, to be in our own technology bubble and forget what it's like for people who don't have access to technology. So when I learned that someone didn't know what a power button looked like on a computer, or when we're trying to help someone do a job application and they don't know how to scroll on a computer, and these are real issues that people are dealing with, it's so easy for us to forget and think, maybe as a smart city, we should just continue to add technology, but we're forgetting about a huge base of people. 23% of residents in Fulton County don't have access to internet. That's a huge number, right? That's almost a quarter of our county's population. And then what we do with our data dashboard is we try and bring data to the people so that we can help capacity build those who are fighting for themselves. And we know that there are plenty of other options for people to get data online, but it's not very user-friendly. So if someone can't even use a scroll bar, how are they going to operate some of these online platforms that do give you data, especially when they're presented at a census tract level, which geographically does not make sense to the average person, or it's so broad that it's only at county level, right? You want to know what's happening in your neighborhood, or maybe even in your zip code. And so we try to bring that to people in that kind of way. And so we really try to bring the people aspect to this conversation of smart cities. And then in addition to working on the west side, before I came to this position, I was working at the CDC, which is located on Buford Highway, and I was working on built environment and public health. So I really do have a connection to both of the communities that we're talking about tonight.
Thank you for your introductions. I guess we're still waiting on David, so we'll go.
And that's who Juan Carlos and my son went to find. So he
Oh,
is
okay.
in the building somewhere.
All right, so when he's here, we'll ask him for a short introduction, but let's get started. So the first question that we kind of wanted you guys to address, and you can do it in any order, maybe if you can just raise your hand or, and then grab the microphone if you want. But let's start with sort of an introduction to smart cities. So let's say you were teaching a class on smart cities, an introductory course. How would you introduce the concept? And would you call Atlanta a smart city? And if not, so if yes, what do you think makes it a smart city? And if not, what do you think might make it a smart city?
I can take a crack at it if you want. I mean, so one of the things which is sort of interesting to and important to understand is that smart cities was the buzzword that was used a lot, right? And but more recently, they've realized that probably that is not the right way to say it. And so, for instance, NSF has come out. NSF is a National Science Foundation. It has come out with a program which is called Smart Connected Communities, as opposed to smart cities. Because what you want, I mean, smartness is not just putting sensors on light poles and so on, right? The city is not going to get smart unless the people are smart. And so, what you want is the ability to, technology can be an enabler for smartness. But that is not the focus of smart city. How do you make the community smart? And so in that context, the way I think about smartness is, I'm a technologist at the core, but what I want to do is I want to use the technology to enable people that are sitting in this panel to do the things that they want to do that will enable smartness to prevail in the community. And it could mean that for those who cannot get on the internet, they don't know how to do that on their own. Why should they have to know how to get on the internet, right? Is there other ways in which you can enable them to access the information or the knowledge that they need? Voice input is very normal for everybody, and so can we use voice-enabled inputs so that they can communicate what their needs are? And then the appropriate action could be taken. So these are the kinds of questions that we all should be asking in terms of making community smart. We have to think about what is the common denominator in terms of the community and the ethos and their abilities, and how can you sort of build smartness out of that. So that's the way I think about that.
Would anyone else like to? Yeah.
I would say in its current form that Atlanta is not a smart city. This is strictly speaking from the terms of city services and how we're providing them, because we're trying to migrate a lot of things onto the internet, which is great because in a way it makes it more accessible, but from my viewpoint it makes it more inaccessible. And it gives our city employees almost a way to kind of hide behind the internet, because, for instance, I was working with somebody who he was trying to get signed up through the Department of Labor to get into a program so that he could get a job. Joblessness is a huge issue that we're working on, and the website was down. He got a ride to the actual Department of Labor, And they said, oh, it's online, we can't help you. And he said, well, your website is down. They said, okay, wait for it to come back up. So that, I mean, that's a problem, right? So if you don't have anyone who can actually answer a question when you're right in front of them because they want you to go to their website, that's a challenge. Also, recently, we were trying to get people signed up for the housing waitlist to get a housing choice voucher through our local housing authority. That's also now all online. It used to be more paper-based. And if you didn't have an email address or you didn't have a phone number, you could not sign up. So then what we had to do, rather than just being able to give people a computer and help them learn how to input information, we then had to sign them up to get a Google Voice number so that they could then, and there were all of these barriers along the way to something that should be so simple, getting someone housing, one of their basic needs.
I really like this, so I'm just going to repeat what you said and kind of build on it. But you asked, like, how would I start talking to students about smart city concept? And something that I hear often in technology worlds when people talk about smart cities is this idea that smartness is essentially about being computationally very powerful and having lots and lots of data. So we have cameras at the intersection of every intersection, and we are able to record data. That is what makes a city smart. And related to that, what a city means then is a city is essentially a container. It's a container for people and information to move through it. So how can those computationally powerful technologies enable us to move data and people more efficiently? So you see in a lot of discussions of smart cities, we see discussion of traffic. How we will be able to route traffic in a more efficient way. But if we think historically about what cities are and ways of thinking about cities, they are much more than just a completion of stuff that move through location. They are about people, as you said. They are about issues and they are about problems. And then if we think about it that way, we can begin to think about, well, maybe there are some parts of Atlanta, some issues where Atlanta is actually very smart, but some others where we are not so smart. And so if we think about it that way, I would move the discussion from the discussion of being smart to being sensible. Like is it sensible in this or that context to have a website, to have computation or not, and how can we begin to make those decisions and say, well, in some contexts, we actually don't need a website. We need to include the human connection. In some contexts, we don't need cameras. We need to protect this area from being watched all the time. So that's how I might begin to think about the idea of smart cities.
And actually, if I can remind me your name?
Nassim.
Nassim, if I can follow up on Nassim's point, I'm so glad you said smart and transitioning the conversation to sensible. What I'm finding in my review, mind you, I'm a social worker. I'm a public policy analyst. I work with nonprofits. I'm the furthest thing from technology. But I do see an issue that comes with comparative of IQ versus EQ. And what I see smart cities are lacking is the EQ. The emotional quotient, the emotional intelligence, the human condition. So I'm delighted to see that my colleagues who have this technological bent are finding that there is this chasm. If we keep on thinking about smart cities primarily from the technological perspective, then we're completely ignoring the very people that we're trying to make smart and more sensible these communities for, which is ultimately the people that we live, work, and play with. So I would agree that, Nassim, your orientation to go, here's an overview of the buzz term. Here is how it progressed from the 90s all the way to now and how the different methods of its evolution have permeated. But now we're at a critical junction that we've had so much focus on the technology that we've actually done it to the detriment of the very people that we're trying to socialize, include, make community, have a sense of belonging for, so that when they are coming to look for employment, we realize that the digital divide isn't just the computer. It is a way of thinking, a way of being, a paradigm, and obviously not sensible.
So there's a lot of interesting things that you said that raised some questions for me, but I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, and then what you alluded to as well, Darlene, about the things that people need to do and how many roadblocks there are. So that connects to something that we've been talking about around literacies, so around literacies for residents of smart cities, right? And so I was wondering if we could elaborate on that and talk about what are the literacies that we need to cultivate or to foster to be able to keep pace with smartness or connectedness.
You mentioned my name, but I think it's Meredith you were trying to address.
Well,
no, so both of you actually kind of mentioned something, but Mackenzie, right?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I can ask a question. Who in this room has ever been to an NPU meeting? Okay, and that's actually a good amount. That's way better than I was expecting. So for those of you that don't know, an NPU is a neighborhood planning unit, and that's how the city of Atlanta is supposed to do all of their planning and reporting back to city council on kind of what they want to see in their neighborhood and their community. But a lot of people don't know what that is. So, I mean, there's a basic divide. This room is not representative, I would say, of the city in that respect. But if we don't even know what our first step as a resident is and who we should talk to, that's a problem, right? So that's a literacy issue, that we're not doing a good job telling our citizens how they can reach out to us, or how they can voice their concerns or their opinions or their suggestions. I mean, that's a very basic one.
What else?
I might actually think about, like, there are obviously literacies that smart cities citizens need to have. Again, this idea of being able to read the city, being able to read where data and the authority of data is coming from. But I would also argue that we are making a mistake if we put the burden on people of smart cities to learn the ways of a smart city. We need to. What if we talk about the literacies of technology designers and companies who are putting these sensors in our cities and say, they need to learn the issues and complexities of people in a city so that they are not creating a system that needs special kinds of literacy to be read. So like we tend to create all these complex technology and then we'll say, well, but then now people need to learn how to counter it or how to understand the structures of power that are behind it, or but what if we don't do that and we say, the people who are designing these technologies need to have the literacy of understanding that they are designing for people and design it in a way that doesn't require that kind of education.
And I think, to follow up on that, what Atlanta does, and probably a lot of other cities also, is really taking that top-down approach, because a lot of times we'll answer to a funder and we'll implement technology or products or even processes that a funder wants to see funded because they have a particular interest or stake in that, and it's not actually what the community needs at all. So what we really need to be able to do is go to a funder and say, this is what we know our city needs. Are you interested in funding that? If not, we'll keep it moving because we're here to actually serve our residents.
And I suspect this would be where community-based participatory research would really be invaluable from a technology standpoint, but also from an end-user standpoint, is if it is all this top-down because of agenda, mission, money, rather than the people who would be the end users, then actually having people invested from the outset who are in community partnerships, who are invested in seeing it grow, where no one party is more important than the other, but they're all co-equals and are invested in this, then you may actually find that not only the technology be useful, but actually used. And then everybody wins. The technologists, the programmers, or developers, they see something that actually benefits the community. And like I said, as a social worker, someone who works in the nonprofit sector, if I'm trying to find ways in order to help my people very simply navigate public transit or just transit in Georgia, in Atlanta, the metropolitan statistical area, I can tell you if I had some type of form that would help me through smart technology, help my clients not have to spend 4 hours to get to a 1 hour appointment to come back around for another 4 hours, and that was before all the hula, you know what we're talking about, happened. how am I going to have someone who is living day to day try to get the basic needs met when they can't navigate a community? And these are people who actually know how to navigate the community. If I take it one step further among the immigrant paradigm and the huge range, forget you. It ain't going to happen. And so you end up finding people who are already feeling unwelcomed and isolated, further being unwelcomed and isolated because of the divides that exist in the community. Technology just being one of them, but what a great, powerful tool if we can learn how to harness it appropriately.
And I think I would be remiss to say, or if I didn't say the fact that we're being based in an academic institution, we see a lot of people not valuing necessarily that community-based participatory research. A lot of times because either a faculty or a student, you're up against a grant deadline that you decided that you wanted to apply for, you're up at the end of the semester is approaching and you need to hurry up and finish your project, and you don't really give the time to developing that community-based aspect, and you rush through it and you lose a huge opportunity, a learning opportunity, but also the opportunity to really make your product or whatever you're working on be successful and valuable and used.
These are intractable problems that don't get solved in 12 weeks.
I mean, that was a question I wanted to ask, actually, that you guys have great suggestions, but how do we even think about, so we have our fifth panelist, David.
And speaking of traffic and these intractable problems that can't be solved in 12 weeks.
Yeah, you can.
Traffic in a bad sense of direction. Put the two together.
So we did a round of introductions. Could you please start with introducing yourself? So share a few lines about what you do, and then we'll continue.
So I'm David-Schaefer. I'm the Director of Advocacy of the Latin American Association. We're a large nonprofit here in the city, and this is our Latino son. See, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So
Are you making the connection now? We made him? Okay, good. And we're very committed to smart cities that are sensible to the people who end up living in these communities. And we're totally family friendly, so may this be part of the spoof that goes on CNN Live when you have a child coming in and another child coming in and the mother coming through. It's just modern day balancing life, work, and play. So welcome to the new century, y'all.
So going back to the questions that you raised and how we should kind of flip the situation and look at the people who are doing the top-down work and the literacies that they need to cultivate and foster, right? How do we go about doing that? How do we go about flipping that coin?
I wish I had a recipe that I could share. Ta-da. But maybe I can build on something that was said before, this idea of people who work in the communities, they know what the issues and problems are of the community. Mm-hmm. But I can imagine a case where somebody might come and look at this, the fact that going to a meeting will take 4 hours and back, and we'll say, well, you know what? Actually, our sensors in the Atlanta area are going to greatly help with that, because with those sensors we can make the right decisions to create public transportation in the right places. Mm-hmm. And I can see that happening, but then we will end up investing a lot of money in those sensors, mm-hmm. whereas we could have actually, with a series of observations that take 3 months and much less money, mm-hmm. Decided that, we need transportation mm-hmm. in these areas, and we don't really need the data from smart cities and mm-hmm. from those technologies mm-hmm. to be able to make those decisions. So a lot of times the end goal is that is suggested is really noble, is really nice, but it ends up being the rhetorical framing for selling and implementing more technology. And so that is one of the literacies that as technologists and as citizens we need to gain to be able to counter that and to be able to know when to say no. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does kind of, and I would love for Kishore to maybe try to address that.
Well, so I think one thing that I want to say is that there are companies that actually are investing in trying to learn what needs to happen in the communities. And for instance, I heard a fantastic talk by a social worker who works for Intel. This happened in Georgia Tech about 3-4 years back, and what she was, I would say maybe more than 5 years back, and what she was studying was how people use cell phones in different cultures. It was a fascinating talk, because what she was saying was, in Africa, for instance, in the olden times, they used to use drums to signal, and so a lot of times, the people who have these mobile devices in communities where they cannot afford to have a plan and things like that, they cannot make really phone calls, but they make calls in such a way that it communicates information without making the call. Pardon me? It's almost like Morse code. And so she was saying that, and similarly she found that, in China, people spend a lot of time, we spend a lot of time in traffic, and they spend a lot of time in lines, getting into trains and buses and so on. And so there they use the cell phone as a book. I'm talking about the time, 5-6 years back, when the form factor was much smaller. And so you might think, how can they use it as a book? It turns out that Chinese language, you can put a lot of characters in one screen. And so they're using it as a book. So she was looking at all of these different cultures and how they were using this technology. And that's literacy for you, right? People are saying, well, you give me a cell phone, I'm not going to make phone calls with it. I'm going to use it in a way that my community can benefit from that particular device. So what I was going to say is that companies do invest, and so what is Intel making? Well, Intel makes chips, not potato chips, but chips, and they need to know what kind of chips they want to make, and they want to know what the communities need, and so there is investment happening. But not enough, obviously. And the other thing that I would say is that, it is very difficult to tell companies that, oh, you should really be focusing on communities and doing the things that you need to do in order to further the community, because everybody is worried about the bottom line. And if the bottom line is going to help, if something is going to help the bottom line, they'll do it. And so as technologists myself, and as social workers and people working in enabling communities, we have to figure out what are all the things that can actually enable them. And working with Sherry here and Mackenzie here, I learned a lot about the West Side community. What are the things that is important for the West Side community? Mackenzie articulated very nicely some of the pressing problems that they have. Things that we take for granted, they don't have it. For instance, they want a bus schedule, bus to arrive one time. They don't know when the bus is going to show up. They're waiting in the bus stop forever, right? So there are simple technological interventions that you can do to enable that. And this is not putting fancy sensors or anything like that. So, there are simple things that you can do to sort of enable that. So I don't want to discount technology altogether, right? But, you can actually say, well, why should a bus take a particular route? If nobody is waiting there, maybe it should take a different route. And so to go to the place where people are waiting rather than go to a place where there's going to be nobody. So here is where technology, very simple technological interventions can actually help. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to study in the West Side community, for instance. So it's not all about, high speed networks and cameras and camera streams and so on. But there are also simple interventions that you can do. And that might not, what is the computer literacy there? Well, just enabling them. One of the things that, there was a very famous computer scientist, Mark Weiser, I'm sure you know, many of you probably know, and he said that technology should sort of weave itself into the fabric of society so that you don't even notice that it is there. But it is enabling things to happen. So I don't think there is anything that you have to do in terms of literacy. I would say that the technology should just blend itself so that I do the normal thing that I do. And I'm not doing anything new to learn the technology. And that's, I think, the challenge for technologists like myself.
Actually, related to the Weiser article that you just mentioned, I have to add, so we just finished the written qualifying exams for PhD students in the Human-Centered Computing Program. And this was one of the questions about Weiser and his vision for computing. And what are the things that it doesn't take into consideration? And so considerations for, so it actually comes back to the same thing, that what are the expectations that we have of people, right? So what are assumptions that he was making with regards to privilege and class and education and such, and it comes back to questions around access and social equity that, that we've sort of tried to organize this, keeping in mind. But let me switch to a different question. So here's the thought, and maybe David, you'd like to start with this. Not to put you on a spot, but can you think of any smart city exemplars that Atlanta could maybe learn from? And what are those aspects that you think Atlanta in particular could benefit from other cities?
Well, I'm not a technology expert, but I guess just thinking about people and Latinos in particular. This is the best I can answer your question, so I'm going to do the best I can. We do know that our people receive a lot of information via their cell phone. And so I think everything I've heard about cities communicating via cell phone is very accurate, at least for our particular Latino immigrant population. Interestingly enough, there is still very much a documented digital divide, except when you get to mobile technology. And so, it makes you wonder, is there really a digital divide at all, given that everybody's going mobile? So I believe anything that we can do to, have apps that are programmed around public transit, for example. We even saw an app the other day that said where deportations are taking place at a particular time. This is crowdsourced. It's kind of like Waze for the undocumented. There's an ICE check up here. I'm not advocating this, by the way. I'm just telling you that meeting people where they are gets technology integrated into their lives. So insofar as cities could find those kinds of things, one of the problems that our population has that Atlanta might consider other cities might have already done is there's no resource map. So when you first come into the country and you've been here a week, and where do I register my kids? Where do I get immunizations? Where's the next bus? Where's the next taqueria that I want to go to? There's no one-stop shop to tell them that, or to tell them in what order they should do these things. And it really seems, talk about low-hanging fruit and simple solutions, it seems like this wouldn't be a hard ask and a do from a technological perspective, but from a logistical one, for some reason we haven't gotten there yet. So I think, at least from our perspective, things that, we have a Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs now. I don't know if they've interrogated all these options, but I think trying to see the world through the view and the lens of not only a newcomer to the city, but a newcomer to the civilization would be a nice quantum leap forward, especially if you want to attract immigrant talent, if you really want to, a good way to ruin a first impression is to, have somebody come to the city whose services you advertise, but they're not accessible. Not because you can't walk there, you can't take a bus there, they simply don't know where to go. So I think presenting a very good public face by putting technology in the hands of those who have never been here before, maybe to this country before, would really be a not only low-hanging fruit, but it would be a great win for the city.
Well, you asked if there were examples that Atlanta can learn from, and I happen to know that in South Bend, Indiana, which is where Notre Dame is, that Notre Dame and Metro Lab Network, they did a lot of smart cities project together. And I think that Atlanta, having so many colleges and universities in the urban core, can probably take some ideas from them. They did two that I thought were relevant here to us. One was basically free Wi-Fi for everybody. So they expanded their fiber optic network from the campus to the city so that everyone had Wi-Fi. And another one they did was they used sensors in their underground pipes so that they could divert the flow of water in their sewage system when there was heavy rainfall. And Atlanta has a huge flooding issue, right? So it would be so easy for us to do that with our combined sewer system. And what it wouldn't do is take away a job, right? So we're very concerned with automation these days and whether or not people are going to have jobs. The last thing that we want to do is kind of outsmart ourselves. I'm a city planner, that's what I went to school for, and I don't want to see our city get so smart that we don't need me to have a job anymore. And so something like that could actually solve a real problem using technology.
Would you guys, do you have any thoughts on what examples we might follow?
I haven't seen any smart cities so far. So to be honest,
maybe there's a problem there.
yeah, I mean everybody wants to have a smart city, and every city that I know of has a smart city project, but I'm yet to see anything that I can say. Oh, and one of the common themes, especially in North America, is transportation. That's that's in the laundry list of every smart city. And they haven't solved the problem. So, so in that sense, I haven't seen anything that you can sort of take away from that. But there are examples of that. For instance, IBM. You may have seen TV commercials of IBM saying "smarter planet," and they want to build a smarter planet. One of the but there are certain things that they've done very well. So, for instance, in Dubuque, Iowa, they took that town, and they put smart meters on all the water supply lines going into the homes, so that they can actually figure out who's having an excessive use of water, more than the average, so that they can flag that, and that might be just a leak in the house. They didn't even know about it, and they're paying a lot of money, and they're also wasting water. Both of those things are happening, right? So that's an example of some things that we can do very easily in cities to make sure that first of all we conserve water. Water is a precious resource, and we also help the community to save money, because why pay more bills when you can pay less with. So those are things that are very simple things that I can, Dubuque, Iowa is not a smart city, but that example is a good example that you can take citywide and apply that, for instance.
So based on what I've heard from you and from David about going back to, or maybe not going back to, but focusing on mobile phones or focusing on conserving resources, would you then define smart as also being frugal?
Frugal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I'll tell you. I mean, how many of you have traveled to Korea and places like that? Korea, China.
I was going to say places like that.
Japan, yeah. I mean, when I say places like that, I mean the parts of Asia where they are very careful about spending natural resources. So if you go to any hotel in Asia, you go and check into your hotel room. You have to put your card in order to get electricity in your room, right? And when you go out, you have to take it out because your key is there, right? And so it automatically cuts off the electricity inside the hotel room. How many hotels in the U.S. have that? Not, we are decadent society when it comes to resources. We just take everything for granted. Running water, hot water, everything we take it for granted, and we waste a lot of resources, right? And even earlier I mentioned well-served communities versus underserved communities. If you take well-served communities, there is a lot of wastage of the resources. I mean, why do I need a plan that has that I have to pay $100 on my mobile phone? Because All I'm doing is make a few phone calls every once in a while. But the carriers have so much bandwidth to sell. They keep on telling you, oh, buy this next plan, get more video data to your phone and so on. And I don't need it, but I have to pay for it. And so I think, when it comes to the digital divide that I see, is the fact that yes, mobile device is something that anybody can have, but connectivity for the mobile device is the hard part. Where do I have the money to pay for the plan if I live in the West Side neighborhood, right? So, but I don't need that exotic plan. Wi-Fi may help if there is Wi-Fi access, but not everywhere do I have Wi-Fi access. So there are ways in which you can actually reduce the cost of connectivity so that it helps underserved communities. It also lowers the cost for the well-served communities, because in the well-served community, we're paying too much for things that we don't have to pay that much.
Any other comments?
No, but it seems like someone in the audience has a question.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So.
I think that as you all are talking about technology, technology is not just the electronic functionality of what most younger people look at as technology. Technology is anything that can advance a community or society, for one. The second thing that I think that is overlooked too is that many of these communities we were talking about were very wealthy at one point in time. The west side of Atlanta was one of the wealthiest communities, but it was funded by the people who lived there.
Right.
The city has never funded any projects there. Or if they have, it's been a very small portion. But as things have happened in the community with the drugs and everything, 20, 40, 50 years later, from Martin Luther King talking about the same exact thing 50 years ago, we're at the same exact point. So to you all's fact that you said that there's a lot of waste in the well-off communities, some of those decision makers are saying do not connect that community. And so where does the advocacy come in to see the value in saying that the best talent Atlanta has is already here? The people who are living in the conditions they're in are very innovative and creative. But how do we convince the people with the money or the people who realize that there are $2.1 billion being spent on the west side of Atlanta? How do we say, okay, well, here's the money, we're showing you the money. How can you now use that same money and those resources to invest in those people who will be the biggest asset to the Atlanta and Georgia community in terms of the workforce?
Now, this goes back to the comment that you made about the infrastructure. If you convince some a company like Cisco or AT&T, they'll say, okay, as a philanthropic effort, we put some infrastructure in different places. But that's not the solution, right? The solution is really sort of understanding what is it that they need and how can you provide it at a cost that is affordable so that they can scaffold off of that, right? I'll give you an example. As a kid growing up in India, in my early years, I don't want to say when that is. So I did not have a phone at home because phone was a luxury, because you have to have a landline into your house, and that is the only way you can have a telephone. Then cell phone came along, and so the India sort of leapfrogged that landline completely, and everybody has now a cell phone, right? So it's a similar sort of thing that we have to think about these communities, underserved communities, not just put the same infrastructure in that place, but think about what is the infrastructure that we have to put so that they get connected. And when I say connected, not in the traditional sense, but I'm saying in innovative ways, so that as a community they're connected to do the things that they want to do, whatever that might be. So that, I think, is the key. Is we need the new ideas coming from people like you all and technologists, and thinking about what may be the next big thing that we can do. That might be the next Google, who knows, right? That actually does the kind of things that helps these communities.
Yeah, there's one aspect of that. There's a chicken or the egg problem here. I have a feeling you and I have talked about this before, maybe. Do people have relationships? Oh, gosh, sorry. Hello, 1, 2. Oh. Para más tarde. Okay. So, do people have technology because they have relationships, or do they have relationships because they have technology? And I really think we need to get back to relationships first. Like you said, anything that advances a society or a people is technology. We call Clovis technology, the spear points from New Mexico and so on. That was the latest and greatest. Fluting came along, and we could slaughter more woolly mammoths, suddenly. But it was based on a pack mentality that people together and collectively could bring down that large animal to feed their neighborhood. And so I think there's some, and that's where advocacy comes in. We've got to invest in programs like My Brother's Keeper. We need to be working with nonprofits to make sure that there's an ecosystem of relationships around young people. Because, for example, pornography addiction is rampant now, and it's a function of technology. But people do that because they're self-medicating because they're lonely. And I heard a quote the other day, it might have been from a movie with Jeff Goldblum, that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And so I think the advocacy piece is really the human piece. You could throw every cell phone out the window and still resolve most of Atlanta's problems by being kind to people. So I think, the tools are important, but they're only as good as the network and the ecosystem of persons who love each other in which they are embedded.
I would just like to add, I can project also, that I think it's really important that we not discount community knowledge, like to what you were saying. Just because someone doesn't have a college degree, even a high school degree, it does not know that they don't know their community and that they don't know what their community needs. They do. No one's listening to them. And so it's important for us to realize the importance of that and not to divide, I have a PhD and you don't, so I'm going to tell you what you need. You don't know anything about that community or how they work or how they use their technology. And so I think Kishore alluded to the fact that we worked together to do an NSF grant, and I think both of us realized a lot through that process about simple technology solutions on our end to some of the challenges we've been having, but also I would say on your end, probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, like problems that you would have never guessed were there and real. And so kind of speaking to a point that you brought up earlier about lots of fancy stuff, because we do focus a lot on product. An example in the West Side recently, a funder installed thousands and thousands and thousands dollars worth of cameras that are supposed to be able to zoom in and see all these crazy things, but there's no one to watch the screens, there's no server space to record what they're watching, and so there was a whole waste of money because there's no way to find out what's going on. Now, we know that the community did say that crime was a problem, but it was never addressed until it became headline news that there was a drug problem on the West Side, that they then decided, well, now let's put these cameras up there, cameras that aren't even doing anything. But they can say, we have technology, we provided you a solution, but it's not really effective.
And it's interesting that solution has the reminiscence of the panoptical, right? This idea that you feel like you're constantly being observed, as opposed to really looking at the root of the issues. Why do we have crime in this area? Do we need to solve it with services, with education, or with cameras? What cameras do is essentially deter people, and they are really not the solution to the crime, which is actually bringing back an idea that is central to smart cities in Atlanta, where they did these community meetings and asked people what they need in their communities, and safety was the main issue that people talked about. And so as a result, they say, well, if we put these cameras in the neighborhoods, we will be able to make people safe. Well, safe for whom? It is for people who are generally, middle and upper class, and it's actually marginalizing people who may be homeless or who may be inhabiting those spaces in a way that is not legitimized further out of the city. So it's a very interesting example where technology comes in as the solution. Well, obviously, we don't even have people to watch those cameras, but even if we did, we would have more problems than actually solving solutions to the problems at their core.
I had one crazy wrinkle to that. I remember in the 1990s there was a police from city, and there had been so many terrorist attacks in that particular city that they set up 24-hour news cameras, and then they had more crime because people wanted to go blow themselves up on TV. So we need to be very careful. I'm not saying that cynically, but we need to be very careful, not only for the panopticon problem that you're referring to, but technology can be insidiously used, even if it's officially sanctioned. And that, I don't know how much the body count multiplied because of that, but no one was more secure as a result of those cameras.
Sherry.
So one of the things that I feel like is at the center is this tension when we say smart cities, right? It's a tension between public and private. It's a tension of commercial and public. And when we talk about technology, oftentimes we think about technology as a consumer good. We don't necessarily think about technology as a public good. And so, I think one of the things that's very interesting is, Kishore, you were saying we should be talking about, kind of smart and connected communities in a particular way. But there's a way in which putting smart with cities almost suggests that technology should be a public good that's responsive, right? That it's not just if you can afford it, then therefore you get to be a citizen of the smart city, but more so like really making those connections that bring people up. And I think the hard part is having a conversation if the ideology is so much based in kind of a corporate or commercial model, then how is it that we expect people to think about this type of technology being embedded into the community as something that is it really is a right? I mean, when you move all of public services online, when you move, a janitorial job online, you effectively are putting a wall up for people. Even though they might have this thing in their hand that they could do something with, if they don't know how to get to that job with that thing in their hand, then it's just a thing in their hand. So I wonder if you all could at least talk about that tension a little bit more explicitly, because I do think it kind of dictates the directions in which we see technology actually being able to address very real issues.
I think, Sherry and I have had this conversation quite a few times. I think all of us have mobile devices, and it is for our personal good. If I want to find the best route to go home, I use this. But it is not for connecting communities. It is not at all for connecting communities. And so I don't even know what may be the right, whether you even need technology to connect the community, right? Sherry was sharing with me some of the problems that, not problems, but the issues that come up if let's say I'm late to pick up my kid from the school. I want somebody to sort of automatically help me with that. And what if I don't have a cell phone to call? What if I don't, how do I connect with people so that people are looking out for each other? And that looking out for each other need not come with technology, or it may come with very simple technology. And so those are, I think, at the forefront of institutions like ours, where we can think about creative ways in which we can help the public good as opposed to the private good. And so it's not an easy problem to solve. There's one question.
Yeah, we do.
Oh.
Do you want?
Thank you. Here, I'll stand. I
noticed that Sheree said something about like kind of an intersection between public and private, and before it was mentioned kind of more a focus on industry and the creators of these technology, and not necessarily the implementers or like the public side of this technology. And as someone who works for one of the smaller local governments in the Atlanta region, I'm kind of wondering what kind of measures that you all think would be necessary to employ within a smaller local government, or maybe even here in the city of Atlanta, to make sure that equity is kept in mind, so that we are making sure that we are including the more underserved populations within our cities when we are looking at moving towards these smarter, more sustainable cities.
I would argue you need to ask them what they need and if it's even smart in their perspective. Because we're coming from a very Western standpoint, a very urban standpoint. And so as y'all have been taking notes, since Spanish is my first language, I process by writing and then I can reflect. One of the things I'm realizing is we're taking it from a very elitist perspective. And so I would come to it that individuals, regardless of where they're coming from, have assets and strengths in the communities that they are a part of and that they feel embedded and have a sense of belonging. And yet we tend to do this top-down approach. And when you think about those who are community residents, both citizen and foreign-born, there is a wealth of knowledge that we're not tapping into, that they themselves are quite entrepreneurial. And if you think about immigrants, for every immigrant that actually develops a business, it actually benefits the community threefold. And so it may be actually a useful thing to do is to connect the technology, individuals who develop the processes, the implementers who will have to then bring it down to the humane level, and then the end user, and actually have an opportunity to have a discussion of what do you define as smart? How do you want to improve this city? What do you define as your community? And then how did you put all these things together to improve your end goal, which is I work in a small community, in a small municipal government, resource poor, but also resource rich. Well, then focus on the resource rich. The other thing I was thinking about was the idea of your return on investment versus your social return on investment. If you have come from a small community, then how do you make that community an attractive place so that people would want to come and live, work, and play there? And one of the things is to have the voice of the community be the voice of the community. So I would argue that if the concept of smart cities is something that you're trying to bring to fruition, it would probably be able to have town halls and community conversations, but not in the stereotypical Western view. It would be literally sitting on people's front porches, having dinners, going to the community park, going to the congregations and worship centers, doing the things that people have done historically with social movements, and actually integrating yourself with the community that is there to say, well, what can we do to make this better, so that it really is a utilitarian end goal, not just a fictional one where we spend all this money and yet nothing is being done. Something that I would argue and encourage all of you to consider is something by Eugene Bardak. He talked about the eightfold path, and it's a process by which people go through moving from idea generation, defining a problem, because sadly how you define the problem, you've actually implicitly defined the solution. And as I'm hearing this, many of us have come from that perspective that as soon as we define the problem, we've already identified what the fix is, and yet we've ignored the community that needs to be part of that fixing. So for those of you who are technology focused, I would encourage you to look about Eugene Bardak's Eightfold Path and see maybe if there's intersections where it comes to your technological expertise and your pedagogy, theories, methods, and how maybe you can intersect this human component to it, because you may actually find that you already have the skill sets, you just needed this added component to make it realized. And then finally, I may have said this already about these tensions that you mentioned about public versus private or commercial and a public good. I'm so glad you said it's a public good, because no one really actually sees it that way. And so the fact that we have resources that make things common goods, we should really reflect on technology or the ability to have interconnectivity a common good. Because once you fail to include someone, then you've no longer met your goal for the common good. So for those of you who are interested in the bottom line, obviously technology is quite costly, the low-hanging fruit as well as the high treetops. But also look at the SROI, the social return on investment. And I think that's where all of you could really maybe turn the conversation or change it to a way that actually allows you to use your expertise in a way that includes the human condition that you're trying to address. So
the other piece of that I've I love what you just said, Darlene. Some of it I think is about the tactical, which is how do I get this smart city piece implemented today? The other is the strategic, which I think refers to what we see as a failure of democracy and a failure of full diversity. So one of the things that we hear a lot is the whiteness of Google, the whiteness of Yahoo. And so if you look at the way technology is formulated and who are the minds at the table that bring technology to the forefront, they're not people that look like society. And if you look at city councils and you look at who mayors are, Gwinnett County is a case in point. We've now become majority minority, however that's said. Whites are in the minority, but if you look at city councils, policy outcomes and technological outcomes are a product of the machine that produces them. And if the machines are monochromatic, you're going to have monochromatic outcomes in terms of both the policy and the technology. So from a tactical standpoint, yes, we should involve family dinners and go to neighborhoods and parks, but from a democratic one, we shouldn't have to. The traditional structures that are put in place, if they were full, that's a stopgap measure to me. We're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. The traditional structures, if they were functioning at full capacity, they would be fully inclusive. And people who look like society would be serving on city councils. The people who are producing technology would look like us. And most of these questions would be addressed before it got to the city council stage or before that iPhone rolled off the conveyor belt and came to the Apple store. So those are things I think that we should focus on as society. Once again, I'm on that quote, making sure our humanity does not exceed our technology. That's where we truly need to focus. And technology can only be implemented to the benefit when we get our humanity straight.
And I think it is very important to meet people where they are. If you have a meeting about smart cities or your city becoming a smart city and you invite people to it, the likelihood of who's going to come and whether that's representative of who you're trying to serve is very unlikely. I brought up MPUs earlier, and we know that most of the people who make up attendees of MPUs are retirees because they have the time, right? They're not working a second job, they don't have kids to take care of, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Seattle is actually doing a major overhaul of how their city government runs right now, and they're hiring community outreach specialists. So they're hiring people who are already in different communities. The example I read about was they have a really high Somali refugee population there, and so they hired people who speak that language and go to their particular community center and talk to them about, hey, have you been signed up for water yet? And they're paying these people $50 an hour to go and do this work, to do something they would already do. And you're really expanding who knows about what's available, and you're better resourcing your community that way.
Are there any more panelists that wanted to comment on this? Yeah.
Okay, so I come from the technology field. I'm an IT person, and the first thing I wanted to comment on was how I've been hearing about social stuff, and I wanted to go ahead and say that technology is not a Band-Aid for crappy relationships. Whether they're racial, whether they're neighborly, whatever they are, technology does not fix crappy relationships. That's not its point. As far as I also heard a lot about technology not meeting the needs of people very well. Even the word paradigm got thrown around, that these people are in a different paradigm entirely. I wanted to say that from my perspective, we do a lot of diligence to make sure that people find technology to be intuitive and easy to use. I mean, just to give you an example of the capability people have, there's literally babies playing games on iPads. It's very intuitive how we can make some technology for people. I think that if there's still a gap, a lot of the time, people in my field, they're artistic. They know what they know how to lead a person to get what they want. But I think that if there's still a gap in people being unable to use an app like Facebook or Google Maps, things like that. I personally had a couple of my cousins come over from India. They were immigrants, and they came from a rural community. And I had to sit down and show them This is what Google Docs is for. This is what Google Maps is for. This is what that is. And I connected it in a need-based approach for them. I didn't just give it out to them all at once. I don't think that there's any kind. If there are gaps at this day and age for people, I don't think that it's necessarily something that I think could be connected just by having a class. I mean, just speaking from my personal experience, there is a need-based approach to it, but there's also I think there also should be a long-term view on it. Like, what do we have coming in the next 20, 30 years? So could we make technology to be something that leads people into there gently? Do we need to skip this portion altogether and be working on the next thing that's coming in instead? Yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Any of the panelists want to respond? All right, we've got another question. Well, maybe not. Yeah.
This may make his question more complicated. The military is using a strategy called VACU, velocity, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, to help us to understand why things are changing so fast to where people can't adjust to it. So it actually adds a new dimension to the problem, is that how do we get our communities, because the technology is a major driver behind it because it helps to change things so rapidly. The other part of it is, has anybody researched Singapore to see how they are, because now there's a driving force behind this. They realize that they have no natural resources except for their people. So they invest in their people, not just the technology, but everything is driven toward developing their people so that they can be more competitive with other nations who have natural resources. So those two things, if you look at that concept of velocity, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which accelerates everything, how do we deal with it in this concept of smart city?
It's volatility.
Volatility, I'm sorry. What did I say? Volatility.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yes, we know that this smart city concept is closer than you think. Northside Drive is in the conversation. So I'd like to know, now that we know that there's a smart city project coming to Atlanta with some of the big name brands, what do we do now?
How do we stop them?
Good luck.
I think so a lot of I think I might actually go back to the theme of smart versus sensible, and related to that is the theme of general versus particular. So the smart cities initiatives that we see at places like the intersection that you're talking about, they take the approach of one size fits all. That we need to put this technology at every corner, and then we will figure out how to collect the data, and then once we have all the data, we will figure out what to do with it. Whereas I might suggest that we need to think about what it means for that intersection to be smart, what it means for this other community to be smart, which is related to a question that was asked before. And we can do that if we begin to think to move away from the notion of being smart to the notion of being sensible, to the notion that we are designing not just technologies, but an ecology of product service systems that might serve a community. If we open it up that way, then the solution is not going to be technology all the time, always, although in some situations we will begin to employ technology in interesting ways. So I would say that we need to watch how that is unfolding very carefully. We need to think about what are the drivers of that. You mentioned Intel. From a different life, I'm an electrical engineer, so I have a bachelor degree in electrical engineering. And I know that the companies like Intel, their driver was the Moore's law, right? The bottom line was met by this idea of making chips faster and faster and faster. But what's happening now, they are reaching the physical boundaries where you can't do that anymore. And so what do? You make sure that you put the same chips now, but you produce a lot of them, because if we want to make every intersection smart, like what's happening at that intersection, then we will ensure that the bottom line is met. And of course, that's a simple narrative, but it is part of the narrative of what is happening. So I would argue that, again, going back to the idea of what is sensible, going back to the idea of starting with very hyper-local problems and thinking about how can we design product service systems that serve them is the way to go, as opposed to thinking about the one size fits all, these general solutions to general problems.
I think particularly the example you brought up, it goes back to a few things we already mentioned, which is one, representation, because I know for a fact that the designers who proposed some plans for particularly North Ave, right where it connects to North Side under that bridge that everyone hates, they're trying to do a road diet and shrink it and add bikes. Now, all the designers on that team are white men, and they all, I know, are cyclists. So they think that it would be great for bikes to come through there. I also know, I'm not going to mention any names, but someone who might own a team that's coming right there along Northside mentioned that he wanted to see all of his ticket holders be able to either walk or bike to that new stadium. But the people who are going to bike probably aren't the people who currently live in the community. So it's a matter of who's making these decisions. And how can we better have representation for the people designing our cities?
A couple more student questions and I'll get to more problem. Did you?
Yeah, sure. So, y'all have talked a lot about, how, the average community member can start to understand this stuff. You've talked a bit about how technologists can meet in the middle. But what about policymakers? To piggyback on this gentleman's question about how quickly things are changing. 20 years ago, we had the 96 Telco Act that was basically just dealing with landline cell towers in the beginning of the information technology era. Now we're talking about, the thing in vogue is these, sensors on light poles and maybe some sensors on intersections, but in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the market's going to drive technology to places we probably aren't even thinking about right now, and policymakers aren't really getting that in their education. So how do we get that into curricula all over the country so these folks are, able to work with private firms, technologists to actually advocate for their communities in smart ways?
That's her job, she said. There you go. Do you want to answer the question? Okay. I took all of it.
Well, I don't have an answer to that question, but it's a very, very good question. And so I think, as researchers, all that we can hope to do is engage in projects that shed light on these fundamentals, right? Politicians work for vote banks, and so if there's not a vote bank, they're not going to be bothered by that community, and so it's not going to be easy to shake the policymakers to do something. But what can be done is, some things come out of not big corporations or policymakers, but by social workers, just like what was being said earlier. You all know about this microfinancing that happened in Bangladesh, and basically, for those who don't know that, he said, well, I don't need collateral to give money to people. I need to know who they are. if I trust them, I'll give the money to them, and they will repay the money. And so microfinancing was the way by which his name is Yusuf. He was a Nobel Prize winner, and he actually financed women in Bangladesh with very simple, with small amount of money that helped them bootstrap and establish a small, it could be a shop that they set up or something like that, for which they didn't have the starting capital. That's the key thing, right? So these are ways in which the community, the well-served community and intellectuals can think about ways in which they can come up with new ideas on what can be done. So I don't think we need to necessarily bring the policymakers into this, but we can impact what policymakers should do by showing them the way. That is the way I would think about it.
And to think about this in practical terms, the technology firms have a major lobby, and they pay a lot of money for those people to go to where politicians are to speak to them directly. We have got to get between the two of them. Otherwise, I don't think that's going to break, because if you're face to face and I send a letter, you win. So there has to be a way for nonprofits or other think tanks to get there first with the message. So it's not just, I think, as much, it's both a function of the politicians not having information, but it's also a function of them having biased information presented and pushed directly in their face. So unless you break that connection, it's not going to change.
We choose who we elect, right? And so maybe there's something that we need to do to make those positions for policymakers more enticing to those who might have a tech background. I'm going to have to throw some shine on our current council member, Andre Dickens, who is a tech alum. He worked in tech for a very long time, up until a few months ago. His chief of staff is a previous engineer. So right now, I think we're kind of making a move to that, at least in Atlanta, for people trying to be a little bit more tech savvy as policymakers.
I actually think one of the things that I keep hearing is more on the consumption end and also on the production end, but not necessarily in terms of circulation. And considering all the issues with net neutrality, I do wonder how, if we're talking about equity, but this idea of bringing the net to people, but then this issue of ownership of the internet, really like commercial ownership of the internet is in play. Like how are we thinking about the ways that we would deal with that? Because that is definitely a public policy issue that is upon us. Right?
Well, just so that everybody is on the same page with respect to this, there are these people who own pipes like Comcast, and then there are people who produce content, right? And so the content producers, they would like preferential treatment, but net neutrality comes into play there, right? So what are the content providers doing these days? They're building their own network. They're building their own pipes. So then they've sort of circumvented the net neutrality issue, because it's their pipe, they can do what they want for their businesses, right? So you can say all you want about net neutrality for the common pipes, but not for the pipes that Netflix owns or Amazon owns, and if they want to dish out their content on the net. So I think that's slightly away from the topic of what smart cities, I would say, because that is, this goes back to the comment that I made earlier, and that is, businesses will invest in infrastructure when there is a return on investment. If there isn't a return on investment, they're not going to invest in it, right? So we have to, that's why I gave this example of the Bangladesh banker who did the microfinancing. I forget his name. Mohammed Yunus. So what he showed the way, and that is being replicated everywhere, right? Other countries also, they are replicating it. And so, it is, and that can actually result in new businesses coming about, right? So in the technology space also, we have to think about ways in which we can do something that is not that expensive, but actually gives connectivity in whatever form they want, right? Not connectivity in the sense of, oh, I think you need this, but finding out what they want and then seeing the things that we can provide for them, with the conversation that we can have with them. So I think it's not net neutrality per se, but it's really sort of figuring out what is it that they need that we can provide by the right technological advances. And I'll give you one simple example. There's research that I do, which is called fog computing. Cloud is up there, fog is closer to the ground, right? So fog computing is where you are trying to provide resources close to the edge of the network for things that you want to do. And that may be the kind of infrastructure which is not very expensive to put. You don't need 100,000 machines in Virginia to give a certain connectivity that we want for whatever we want to do in say the West Side, right? So that's a way by which we can think about technological interventions that are low cost, doable. No company will do it because there's no return on investment. But if we can show that that can actually work, that can be replicated in other places, then that might actually be a way by which we can get around the problem of net neutrality that you mentioned.
Can I ask a question and actually invite the individual who makes it their job to actually make the connection between policy and practice? Knowing that we do have this Goliath that will be upon us about a smart city initiative in our community, it'd be good to hear from someone who's on the ground dealing with this to see if what we're saying is even relevant, and if not, then what can we do to change the conversation while we have a captive audience, people who are interested in making a better change?
Yeah, sure. My name is Leslie Casita. I'm with the Atlanta Regional Commission. I'm the transportation technologist and most recently heading up the Smart Cities program. And over the past few years, we have been engaging with our local elected officials, county, city, transit operators, state legislators, all those levels, and GDOT and so forth, to bring them up to speed with what's happening in all of these emerging technologies. And we constantly keep our data relevant on broadband accessibility, ETA areas, which are equitable target areas, education attainment. Yeah, the data that we can get our hands on, we analyze. We are just now starting to make that connection stronger between the industry leaders, the startups, the communities, and the decision makers in our region to come together at tables to start saying, these are the challenges I have, these are the challenges I have, how can we work through these to make sure we're building a better business model for you, better communities for us, making sure that everyone wins as best as that could look like. That's very Pollyanna, that's very happening at a quick pace because we understand we have to get ahead of it, we're already behind it. The city of Atlanta is doing what they're doing, and all we can do is learn from anything they stumble upon and share it with communities across the region so that we don't duplicate efforts and duplicate failures along the way. So that's what I do. We've done multiple surveys of the 20 county region to take a pulse on how people feel about autonomous vehicles, what the barriers are in their communities, et cetera. We could do a better job of that. I think we're not reaching everyone we need to be reaching. We acknowledge that, so that's something else we're doing. My question for you guys, I have a couple questions, two parts. What can we do to be more resilient as communities in the eye of technology? There was a comment about bicycle lanes on MLK. For me, as a transportation planner, my background, I see that as a resilient option, given mobility options, not just cars, streetcar or flexible shuttles, what have you, options. So I don't see the bike lanes as a knock. That's just me, though, but that's one resiliency question I would like to pose. Second one is, what can institutions like Georgia Tech or Kennesaw State University do to empower or reskill or upskill members in our communities that don't have GEDs or don't have the skills to get into great institutions like KSU or Georgia Tech, to train them in their communities, to have them pose the challenge and answer the challenge at home and empower their surroundings.
Well, maybe I'll clarify. The bike comment wasn't necessarily a knock at bikes. Right, and I mean, like I said, I come from a public health background and I'm a planner, so I note that biking is a great option for a healthy community, but also for a mobile community. My point was really to dictate that who the suggestion is coming from and who is being suggested to, that the chasm is there, right? And so that was more so to be an example of representation, not to say that it wasn't a good idea. That was my comment.
Does anyone else want to answer the questions on the panel?
Well, so one thing I might say is that even in institutions like Georgia Tech, forget about upskilling people who don't have. There's a lot of things that we do in the education system today which is completely flawed. Yep. Right? I mean, we put students through certain curricula, not clear that they should have all of that, but we put them through that anyhow. And so I think there is fundamental rethink that has to happen, even in institutions, not thinking about anything else, but just the pedagogy of what we are doing. And so modularizing it so that we actually combine the knowledge units that you want, so that it's not take my course, you have to suffer through that for 16 weeks. So it should not be like that. And I think if you take that idea and then go into the communities, then you can actually modularize the skill set that you can actually impart to them. And that should start as community activity from institutions like Kennesaw State or Georgia Tech in engaging with the community and seeing, what are the things that we can do to help them to, in whatever way they want to progress, not impose on them, this is what you should learn, but trying to figure out what can be done to sort of improve the skill set.
So I have two other comments. One, in terms of the survey question and how do you get at your population that really needs the services that you're providing, there are plenty of options. I think that I remember the survey, I'm pretty sure I took it, that it was online. And if you partnered with the libraries, for instance, which we know are a huge place where people are consuming internet if they don't have it in their home, you partner with them, people get some sort of reward if they participate in the survey, and that way you can kind of get at communities that you might otherwise miss. And also maybe Darlene and you can talk about the idea of kinship networks in terms of becoming a resilient city. I know that maybe in terms of our zoning, we exclude a lot of multifamily or multiple family members living in the same household just through kind of what our policies are. So maybe you guys can speak to how a city could better prepare or foster those kind of kinship networks that makes it easier for low-income minority immigrant communities in the city to thrive and foster.
Can you focus on the housing task force that you've been a part of and speak to that?
Yeah. Immigrants don't live like other people, so I think that's a blanket statement to put out there, which is maybe a gross overgeneralization. But there is that tradition of having multi-generational families under the same roof, which is not only efficient from a resource perspective, but also it's a norm to have the family itself be the basic building block of the Gemeinschaft that exists. So. That's a cultural thing, and our policies currently around housing don't fit that, and I imagine that some of our technological supply reflects some of the thinking around housing. I don't know exactly how that would break down, but it's definitely an important piece. I know for us, we bend all of our programming towards the family, so we try to create things that unite families and bring them closer together and make them cohere, not disappear. So I imagine that I don't know that much about technological policy, but some of those lessons need to be brought home, that if this is really going to catch fire or go viral inside immigrant communities, you've got to work within the network that they understand. And so that would be my comment on that.
And it's a smart, viable network. So it is a smart city within its own sphere. right? And yet we see it as a detriment. But they're very innovative, they're very efficient, they're very wise with their choices, and as a result, they're able to be resilient in this community that may be trying to be resilient overall. And so you posed a challenge, and I think it's a wise one, maybe even as a way of concluding or transitioning the conversation about, what can be done and what can maybe entrepreneurial young people or young at heart people who are in colleges do, since it's hard to be able to focus on one denominator when there's so many denominators. But I know that here at Georgia Tech you have lots of studios, for example, or academies of some sort where you go out into the community and experiment. That's the very nature of what a technical institution is trying to do, to help you critically think in the moment and address social issues with technological advances. I may be wrong, but isn't that your goal? That's why you came to Georgia Tech. And I know from our perspective, even though we're not a tech institution, we've acquired Southern Poly, so now we have some kinship with the technology bent. And as I'm talking to the people who are at former SPSU, as a social worker and a nonprofit person, we're realizing that we actually have the same end goal, but we're talking different languages. And so I'm seeing it from one worldview, and yet when I'm talking to them, I'm like, I totally get it. You know who that is? That's this person, this person. You need to read this journal. And they're like, that's social work. That's like soft cotton candy. And I'm like, no. Like, read this, and you're totally talking about this issue. It's just we have a different lingo. And then all of a sudden, when I read theirs, I'm like, you know what? I never knew about this micro perspective. This is totally what I've been doing over here in social work. So I would pose a challenge. I don't know if anybody here has the capital to do so, but we have, for example, the Atlanta Speaks survey. We have tons of surveys, but I'm just thinking Atlanta Speaks. Atlanta Speaks is a survey that is done now for the past 4 maybe years. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but it's a relatively recent survey. So although Atlanta Regional Commission does a ton of work and lots of surveys, this survey in particular actually speaks to the people and what they say is in need. And for the past 4 years, the issues of critical importance for Atlantans or people in the MSA have been pretty consistent. And so I would say go to the AJC in the archives, go into Good Search, Google, whatever your preferred search engine is, and type in Atlanta Speaks and see what the surveys have resulted. And maybe there's an opportunity to do a studio where you bring people who have a tech background with nonprofit social work interests and put them together in the same studio to address the specific 5 major themes that have come out Atlanta Speaks. Because this is a very population that will have the Atlanta Smart City Initiative birthed upon them, and yet these very issues that we've addressed as a community, and I say holistically community with big C and little c, have not been addressed. So how are we going to think that parachuting outsiders are going to make this problem fixed when we ourselves who are local are not even able to resolve our own issues? And maybe this would be a chance for us to maybe build a bridge with the studios and academies that already exist at Tech, those that exist at former SPSU, now KSU, and partner with the ARC and say, okay, put these great minds to work. Retain local talent in our state and actually let us address these social issues that we live in and we want to improve. So that would be my challenge, and I don't know if there's people at ARC you would say this would be a good thing to connect with, and maybe the organizers of this panel could then follow up with that conversation.
And that is a wonderful closing note. Thank you, Darlene. Please thank our guests and also thank yourselves for coming. Being here with the audience.